Hello, my wonderful English learners. Welcome back to our storytelling adventure. Let me ask you something that might feel very familiar. Have you ever walked into a room and completely forgotten why you went there? Or maybe you've met someone new. They told you their name, and 5 seconds later, it's completely gone from your memory? Perhaps you've studied for hours, reading the same information over and over, but when test time comes, your mind goes blank? If this sounds like you might think, I just have a terrible memory. Some people are born with good memories, and I'm not one of them. But what if I told you that's not true? What if I told you that memory isn't a talent you're born with? It's a skill you can learn and develop. Let me teach you this word, develop. D-E-V-E-L-O-P. It means to grow or improve something gradually through practice and effort. Today, I want to tell you the story of Casey, a student who believed they had the worst memory in the world. Casey struggled to remember names, forgot important information, and felt embarrassed about their broken brain. But Casey discovered something that changed everything. 12 powerful techniques that transformed their memory from weak to remarkable. Are you ready to discover how Casey went from forgetting everything to remembering anything they wanted? Let's begin this memory-transforming journey together. Casey was a 22-year-old college student studying international business. They had big dreams of working with people from different countries, but there was one major problem. Casey couldn't remember anything. Major means very important or significant. In language classes, Casey would learn new vocabulary words, but by the next day they were gone. In history class, Casey would study dates and events for hours, but during exams, their mind felt empty. The most embarrassing moments happened during social situations. Casey would meet new people at parties or networking events, and within minutes of learning their names, the names would completely disappear from memory. "Hi, I'm Sarah," someone would say. "Nice to meet you, Sarah," Casey would reply. 5 minutes later, "I'm sorry, could you remind me of your name again?" Casey felt terrible about this. They started avoiding social events because forgetting people's names felt so rude and unprofessional. Unprofessional means not meeting the standards expected in work or business situations. "I must have a broken brain," Casey thought sadly. Other students remember everything so easily. They can recall facts, names, faces, conversations. But my memory is like a broken computer that can't save anything. Casey tried different solutions, writing everything down constantly, setting phone reminders for everything, even considering taking memory supplements. Supplements are pills or vitamins that people take to try to improve their health or abilities. Nothing seemed to help. Casey felt frustrated and began to believe that having a good memory was simply something you were born with, and Casey wasn't one of the lucky ones. The breaking point came during an important presentation in Casey's business class. Casey had prepared for weeks, but when standing in front of the class, they forgot half of their key points and stumbled through the presentation. Breaking point means the moment when you can't handle a difficult situation anymore. That evening, sitting in the library, feeling defeated, Casey was ready to give up on her dreams of international business. Defeated means feeling like you've lost or failed. That's when Casey met Professor Williams. Professor Williams was the university's cognitive psychology instructor, known for her research on learning and memory. She noticed Casey sitting alone in the library, looking discouraged. Cognitive psychology is the study of how the mind processes information, learns, and remembers. "You look like someone wrestling with a challenge," Professor Williams said kindly, sitting down across from Casey. Casey explained their memory problems with embarrassment. "I think I just have a naturally bad memory, Professor. Maybe some people are just born that way." Professor Williams smiled gently. "Casey, let me share something that might surprise you. You don't have a weak memory, you just have an untrained one." "What do you mean?" "Think of memory like a muscle," Professor Williams explained. "If you never learn proper techniques for lifting weights, you'll struggle to lift even light objects. But if someone teaches you the right form, the right methods, suddenly you can lift much more than you imagined." Techniques are specific methods or ways of doing something effectively. Casey felt skeptical. Skeptical means having doubts or not fully believing something. "Is it really possible to improve memory that much?" Casey asked. Professor Williams nodded confidently. "Absolutely. There are 12 proven techniques that can transform how your brain processes and stores information. Memory champions, people who can memorize entire books or thousands of numbers, weren't born with special brains. They just learned and practiced these methods." Memory champions? Casey had never heard of such people. People who compete in memory competitions, memorizing incredible amounts of information in minutes. But here's the secret. They use techniques that anyone can learn. Casey felt a spark of hope for the first time in months. "Would you be willing to teach me?" Casey asked eagerly. "I'd be delighted. But remember, knowing these techniques isn't enough. You must practice them consistently. Are you ready for that commitment?" Casey nodded firmly. "I'm ready to try anything." If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you can learn more English through stories with us. The next day, Casey met Professor Williams in her office, eager to learn the first memory technique. Before we learn any advanced methods, Professor Williams began, we need to address the foundation, attention. Attention? Casey looked confused. I thought we were going to learn memory tricks. Professor Williams held up a pen. Casey, what color is this pen? Blue? Casey answered quickly. Professor Williams put the pen down. What was written on the side of the pen? Casey paused, realizing they had no idea. I don't know. I didn't notice. Exactly. This demonstrates the most important principle. You don't have a memory problem, Casey. You have an attention problem. Foundation means the basic, most important part that everything else is built on. Professor Williams explained, your brain cannot remember what it never clearly saw, heard, or focused on in the first place. Attention is the key that unlocks memory. She pointed to Casey's phone, which was buzzing with notifications. The modern world is designed to steal your attention. Social media, notifications, multitasking, they all train your brain to never focus deeply on anything. Multitasking means trying to do several different things at the same time. Professor Williams taught Casey the 5-second rule. When learning something important, stop everything else, look directly at it, say it out loud, and repeat it mentally for 5 full seconds. Let's practice, she said, introducing herself to Casey as if they were meeting for the first time. Hi, I'm Professor Sarah Williams, she said clearly. Casey followed the technique, looked directly at her, focused completely, and said aloud, Professor Sarah Williams. Then Casey repeated the name silently 3 times while maintaining eye contact. How was that different from your usual way of meeting people? Professor Williams asked. Casey was amazed. I actually feel like the name is stuck in my brain now. Usually names go in one ear and out the other immediately. Go in one ear and out the other is an expression meaning you hear something but don't remember it at all. That's because you gave it real attention for the first time, Professor Williams explained. This simple technique will improve your memory immediately. Casey practiced the attention technique for the rest of the week and was shocked by the results. Names, faces, and important information began sticking in their memory naturally. A week later, Casey returned to Professor Williams with exciting news. "The attention technique is working. I'm remembering names much better. But I still struggle with abstract information, like vocabulary words or historical facts." Professor Williams smiled. Perfect timing for technique number 2, turning words into pictures. Pictures? Casey looked puzzled. Your brain doesn't remember words very well, Casey, but it remembers images brilliantly. Words are abstract and boring to your brain, but pictures are alive. They have color, emotion, shape, and movement. Abstract means existing as an idea rather than something you can see or touch. Professor Williams demonstrated with Casey's Spanish vocabulary homework. You need to remember that biblioteca means library in Spanish. Instead of repeating the words, create a vivid mental image. She guided Casey through the visualization. Imagine a giant book with legs walking into a beautiful building. The book has a name tag that says Biblioteca, and it's going to live in this special house for books, the library. Visualization means creating pictures in your mind, like daydreaming, but on purpose. The more strange, funny, or exaggerated the image, the better your brain remembers it. Exaggerated means making something seem much bigger, better, or worse than it really is. Casey tried this with another word, montaña, mountain. Casey imagined a massive chocolate mountain with montaña spelled out in white frosting on top, with people climbing it to eat pieces of the chocolate. "This feels silly," Casey laughed. "Silly is perfect. Your brain loves silly, strange, and emotional images. They're memorable because they're different from everyday boring information." Professor Williams taught Casey to make images even more powerful by adding bright colors, make things neon green, electric blue, or flaming red. Exaggerated size, make things tiny like ants or huge like buildings. Movement, make things dance, explode, or transform. Emotion, make images funny, surprising, or dramatic. Casey spent the week transforming boring study material into vivid mental movies. Spanish vocabulary, business terms, and historical facts became colorful, animated scenes in Casey's mind. The results were remarkable. In their next Spanish quiz, Casey remembered every vocabulary word perfectly by recalling the silly images. "Professor Williams, this is incredible," Casey reported. "I'm remembering things I would have forgotten in minutes before." 2 weeks into their memory training, Casey faced a new challenge: memorizing a list of 10 business principles for an upcoming presentation. "I can turn individual words into pictures now," Casey told Professor Williams. "But how do I remember a long list of different items?" Professor Williams introduced technique number 3, The story method. Your brain doesn't like disconnected facts, Casey, but it loves stories. Stories have characters, emotion, drama, and connection, exactly what your memory craves. Disconnected means not related to each other, like random pieces that don't fit together. She showed Casey how to transform the boring business principles into an unforgettable story. Instead of memorizing customer focus, innovation, teamwork, quality, leadership, create a crazy story that connects them all. Professor Williams demonstrated, once upon a time, there was a customer who was very focused on finding the perfect pizza. She needed innovation to create a new recipe, so she built a team to work together. They demanded the highest quality ingredients and chose a strong leader to guide them. Once upon a time is the traditional way to begin fairy tales and stories. Casey was amazed how easily the story flowed and how naturally it included all 10 principles. The story creates a path for your mind to follow, Professor Williams explained. Instead of trying to remember isolated facts, you just follow the story and each scene reminds you of the next principle. Casey practiced creating stories for different types of information. Shopping lists became adventures about characters collecting items. Historical events became dramatic narratives with heroes and conflicts. Scientific processes became stories about tiny characters working inside the body. This makes studying feel like entertainment instead of work, Casey observed. Professor Williams nodded. Exactly. When learning feels like play, your brain stays engaged and remembers much better. Engaged means actively interested and involved, paying close attention. A month later, Casey noticed a concerning pattern. The memory techniques worked beautifully for short-term recall, but some information seemed to fade away after a few weeks. Professor Williams, I remembered everything perfectly from my presentation last week, but now some of those business principles are getting fuzzy in my memory. Fuzzy means unclear or not sharp, like looking at something through fog. Professor Williams nodded knowingly. This brings us to technique number 4, spaced repetition. This is the secret to making memories permanent. She explained the difference between cramming and true learning. Cramming is like writing in sand. It looks clear at first, but the waves wash it away quickly. Spaced repetition is like carving in stone. Each review makes the memory deeper and more permanent. Cramming means trying to learn a lot of information quickly, usually right before a test. Professor Williams drew a timeline showing the optimal review schedule. Learn something new? Day 1. First review after 1 hour. Second review after 1 day. Third review after 2 days. Fourth review after 4 days. Fifth review after 1 week. 6th review after 2 weeks. 7th review after 1 month. Each time you review, your brain says, "Oh, this information again. It must be important," and stores it deeper and deeper. Optimal means the best possible, most effective. Casey was skeptical about the time investment. Isn't this a lot of work, reviewing the same information 7 times? Each review takes less time than the previous one. By the 4th review, you'll recall the information almost instantly. And after the 7th review, it becomes permanent. You'll remember it for years without any additional practice. Professor Williams helped Casey set up a simple review system using index cards and a calendar schedule. Casey tried this with their Spanish vocabulary. Instead of studying 50 new words once and forgetting them, Casey learned 10 words and reviewed them on the spaced schedule. The results were remarkable. After 1 month, Casey could instantly recall every word from the first set, while words learned through cramming had completely disappeared. "This is like magic," Casey marveled. "The words feel permanently stuck in my brain now." "Not magic," Professor Williams smiled. "Just science. You're working with your brain's natural learning patterns instead of fighting against them." As Casey's memory skills continued improving, Professor Williams introduced a more advanced concept. "Casey, you've mastered attention, visualization, stories, and spaced repetition. Now let's explore the most powerful memory amplifier, emotion." Amplifier means something that makes another thing stronger or more powerful. The stronger the emotion attached to information, the deeper it gets stored in your memory, Professor Williams explained. Your brain prioritizes emotional experiences because they were often important for survival. Prioritizes means treats as most important, gives special attention to. She shared examples. You probably remember exactly where you were during your happiest or scariest moments, but you can't remember what you had for lunch 3 days ago. Why? Because one had strong emotion, the other didn't. Casey nodded, recognizing this pattern in their own life. "But what if the information I need to learn is boring?" Casey asked. "Like mathematical formulas or legal terminology." Terminology means the special words used in a particular subject or profession. Professor Williams taught Casey how to create artificial emotional connections. Let's say you need to remember that the formula for the area of a circle is pi r squared. Instead of just memorizing it, create an emotional story. She demonstrated. Imagine You're at a pizza party. Circular pizza equals circle. You're starving and can only eat if you correctly calculate how much pizza there is. Your stomach is growling painfully, emotion, and you remember pi r squared, pronounced just like pi r squared. Everyone cheers when you solve it, and you get to eat the delicious pizza. Artificial means created by humans, not natural. Casey practiced adding emotional elements to dry academic material, imagining the consequences of forgetting important information, creating competitive scenarios where knowledge meant winning, inventing characters they cared about who needed the information, using humor and surprise to make boring facts amusing. Even fake emotions work, Professor Williams noted. Your brain responds to imagined feelings almost as strongly as real ones. Within weeks, Casey found that information with emotional connections stuck far better than purely factual material. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you can learn more English through stories with us. 2 months into their memory training, Casey had become quite skilled at remembering information for personal use. But Professor Williams had one more powerful technique to share. Casey, if you want to remember something forever, teach it to someone else immediately after learning it. Casey looked surprised. But I'm still learning these techniques myself. How can I teach them? Professor Williams smiled. Teaching isn't about being an expert, Casey. It's about organizing and explaining information in your own words. This process forces your brain to truly understand and remember. Organize means to arrange information in a logical, clear order. She explained the science. When you learn passively, you're a receiver, but when you teach, you become a creator. Your brain has to rebuild the knowledge from inside, making it unforgettable. Professor Williams showed Casey different ways to teach, even without formal students. 1. Explain to a friend or family member. Casey started explaining memory techniques to their roommate during dinner conversations. 2. Record yourself teaching. Casey made short videos on her phone explaining each technique as if teaching a class. 3. Write teaching posts on social media. Casey wrote social media posts sharing memory tips with clear, simple explanations. 4. Create study guides for classmates. Casey began making simplified summaries of complex course material for study groups. 5. Teach yourself aloud. Casey would walk around their apartment verbally explaining concepts to an imaginary audience. Teaching is not the end of learning, Professor Williams emphasized. Teaching is the proof of learning. Proof means evidence that something is true or has happened. Casey discovered that attempting to teach immediately revealed gaps in understanding. When I try to explain spaced repetition to my roommate, I realize I don't fully understand the science behind why it works. "Perfect," Professor Williams replied. "Now you know exactly what to study more deeply." After implementing the teaching technique, Casey's retention improved dramatically. Information that Casey taught to others became permanently embedded in memory, while untaught material remained more fragile. Retention means the ability to remember information over time. Embedded means firmly fixed or placed deeply inside something. As Casey's final lesson, Professor Williams introduced the most advanced technique, the Mind Palace method. This is the technique used by memory champions and ancient scholars before books existed, she explained. Scholars are people who study a subject deeply and are considered experts in it. Your brain remembers places better than abstract facts. The Mind Palace technique uses this natural ability by associating information with specific locations in a familiar space. Professor Williams guided Casey through creating their first Mind Palace using Casey's apartment. Close your eyes and mentally walk through your front door. What's the first thing you see? "My coat closet," Casey replied. "Perfect. Now let's say you need to remember the first 3 memory techniques we learned: attention, visualization, and story method." Professor Williams helped Casey place vivid, exaggerated images in each location. Coat closet, a giant eyeball representing attention, hanging among the coats, staring intensely at everyone who enters. Living room, a massive movie screen representing visualization, showing colorful, animated pictures of everything Casey needed to remember. Kitchen, a wise old storyteller sitting at the table, weaving all the kitchen items into an epic tale. Epic means grand and impressive, like a great adventure story. Now, Casey, close your eyes and walk through your apartment again. What do you see? Casey mentally walked through and easily recalled all 3 techniques by seeing the placed images. "This is incredible," Casey marveled. "I can see the information clearly just by walking through my mental apartment." Professor Williams explained, "Memory champions use this technique to memorize thousands of pieces of information by creating elaborate mental buildings with hundreds of rooms." Elaborate means detailed and complex, with many parts. Casey practiced placing different types of information throughout their mind palace. Spanish vocabulary in the bedroom. Business concepts in the bathroom. Historical dates in the hallway. The key is making the images as strange, emotional, and exaggerated as possible, Professor Williams reminded. Your brain remembers the unusual. Casey found the mind palace technique particularly powerful for sequential information, lists that needed to be remembered in specific order. 6 months after meeting Professor Williams, Casey's life had transformed completely. The student who once forgot names within seconds now remembered the names of everyone in their classes, professors, and networking contacts. Casey's grades improved dramatically as information stuck permanently instead of disappearing before exams. Dramatically means in a very noticeable and impressive way. But the changes went beyond academics. Casey's confidence soared as they became known as someone with an exceptional memory. Professors began asking Casey to help tutor struggling students. Employers at internship interviews were impressed by Casey's ability to recall detailed information about their companies and positions. Soared means went up quickly and high, like a bird flying into the sky. Exceptional means unusually good, much better than normal. Most importantly, Casey's relationship with learning completely changed. What once felt like a struggle against a broken brain now felt like an exciting challenge using powerful tools. Professor Williams, Casey said during their final meeting, I understand now that memory isn't a talent, it's a skill. And like any skill, it gets stronger with practice. Professor Williams beamed with pride. You've learned something even more valuable than memory techniques, Casey. You've learned that your brain is capable of far more than you imagined. Beamed means smiled very brightly and happily. Casey reflected on the journey. I used to think I was just unlucky to have a bad memory. Now I realize I was never taught how memory actually works. It's like I was trying to drive a car without knowing how to use the steering wheel. What will you do with these skills now? Professor Williams asked. Casey's eyes lit up with excitement. I want to help other students who feel the way I used to feel, like their brains are broken. I'm going to start a memory coaching club on campus and teach these techniques to anyone who wants to learn. Professor Williams smiled. Remember, Casey, knowing these techniques isn't enough. The real power comes from practicing them daily and teaching them to others. Casey nodded confidently. I understand. Memory mastery isn't about memorizing the techniques. It's about living them. Let me summarize Casey's incredible memory transformation and the key techniques we learned today. Casey mastered 7 powerful memory techniques. Foundation of attention. You can't remember what you don't clearly notice first. Words to pictures. Transform abstract information into vivid, colorful mental images. Story method. Connect disconnected facts through dramatic, emotional narratives. Spaced repetition. Review information at increasing intervals to make it permanent. Emotional anchors. Attach feelings to information to strengthen memory storage. Teaching others. Explain what you learn to make it unforgettable. Mind palace. Use familiar locations to organize and recall complex information. Key vocabulary to remember. Develop. To grow or improve something gradually through practice. Techniques. Specific methods for doing something effectively. Abstract. Existing as an idea rather than something concrete. Visualization. Creating pictures in your mind purposefully. Retention. The ability to remember information over time. The most important lesson. Memory isn't a fixed talent you're born with, it's a trainable skill that improves with understanding and practice. Casey proved that anyone can transform their memory from weak to remarkable using scientific techniques. Questions for reflection. Which of Casey's memory techniques sounds most helpful for your own learning? What information do you wish you could remember better? How might improving your memory change your confidence in learning English? Remember Casey's discovery. Memory isn't a talent, it's a skill that gets stronger with practice. Your memory challenge. Choose one technique from Casey's journey to try this week. Maybe use the 5-second attention rule when meeting new people. Or turn 3 new English vocabulary words into vivid mental pictures. Notice how it affects your recall. Like Casey, you have far more memory potential than you might realize. These techniques can help you not only remember better, but also feel more confident in your learning journey. Don't forget to like this video if Casey's transformation inspired you. Subscribe for more learning and memory stories in English and share in the comments. Which memory technique are you most excited to try? Until next time, my wonderful English learners, remember, your brain is more powerful than you think, and with the right techniques, you can remember anything you truly want to learn.